Hello and welcome to the Washington AHEC podcast. My name is Jordan Johnson. I'm the Senior Coordinator for the Southwest Washington Area Health Education Center. I'm excited today to be joined by guest Dr. Maria Yang. Dr. Yang is a public health psychiatrist who has spent most of her career working with people experiencing homelessness, and she has offered to join me today in a discussion on verbal de-escalation. Welcome, Dr. Yang.
Hello.
How are you doing today?
Well, thanks so much for having me.
Good. Yeah, we're excited to have you. We've been able to work on a couple of projects since I started working with the Southwest Washington AHEC. I know that you're very experienced. You have a lot of lived experience, work experience, practical experience in this topic. So when we were decided that we wanted to talk about verbal de-escalation, you were one of the first people that we thought of to invite, and we're happy to have you here.
Thank you.
So our topic again today is going to be verbal de-escalation. In a healthcare setting, I guess the principles maybe would apply to multiple settings, but we're working with healthcare students, so specifically in a healthcare setting. So could you maybe introduce the topic for us? Like give us that 10,000 foot overview of verbal de-escalation. What's the history of it? What is some important to know things about verbal de-escalation?
Sure. Thank you. So people often in healthcare settings, when we're talking about verbal de-escalation, they often jump straight to psychiatric units and psych patients. And that's actually not where most of the skills are used all the time. We often have conflicts with people in the settings that we work in because people are often getting bad news, unexpected news, or they're super stressed out because they're worried they're going to learn something they don't want to learn. And as we all know, when we are stressed out, we often can be overreactive and we're not even mad at the person in front of us. We're just upset with what's happening. So verbal de-escalation is such an important skill, regardless of what role you have in healthcare. So whether you are patient facing or administrative facing, sometimes we end up having to de-escalate our colleagues. So these are important skills to have, even if you are not planning to have any career working with any person, like living person in healthcare, or you're not going to go into psychiatry. Part of the reason why verbal de-escalation is so important is because we are here to serve patients and we need to be able to manage ourselves, which means keeping ourselves calm. And if we can keep ourselves calm, then we can keep the other person in front of us. We increase the likelihood that they're going to be calm. So oftentimes, again, the term de-escalation implies things are already out of hand. There's a crisis happening. People are going to get tackled. And the reason why we want to really emphasize the word verbal in verbal de-escalation is so much of this is actually doing prevention to prevent people from really doing things on both sides that people are going to regret.
Really interesting, because we both have a psych background. I studied psychology with a mind to get into clinical psych for a while, and then of course you're a psychiatrist. So it is, you're right. There is that kind of like connotation that it carries, that like, oh, de-escalation, like the situation's already out of hand. One of the things I really enjoyed learning about was like from a strengths-based approach. So it's like we're going to approach it from the setting that it's a tense situation. We have some things we need to work through, but ultimately we have a goal that we're trying to reach.
Absolutely.
Yeah, very cool. Well, so now that we have that 10,000 foot view of the topic, overview of the topic, what would you say are some like your main objectives? So you said like we're trying to approach it from almost a preventative aspect. So what are some of the main objectives then?
So the main objectives, and I really appreciate you bringing up the strengths-based approach. So much of de-escalation involves looking for points where people can agree. And because inherently in healthcare dynamics, all of us who are working as the staff person, if we're the one with the title, we almost always, not always, but almost always have more power than the patient. And patients, whether they're explicitly aware of it or not, they will sense that. So any chance that we have to focus on what they're doing well, what is going well, because you're looking for points of agreement. So you're looking for points of agreement, and I'm probably going to say this a lot during the course of this conversation. So much of it is just managing yourself. So we are humans, we get biased about things, and if we start thinking that people have ill intentions or that this is going to go badly, it actually just increases the likelihood that things are going to go badly. So a lot of it is focusing on strengths, finding areas of agreement, and realizing that you're interacting with another human being. Like they don't want to have a bad interaction with you for the most part. The vast majority of people don't want to have a bad interaction with you. There's a very small minority, let's not be naive. There's a very small minority who they are going to have a great day if they can piss you off. We're not talking about those people. We're talking about the 99.9 other percent of the people who actually want to have a nice interaction. So you having more power generally in the situation, you have more influence in how the shape, contours, tone of the conversation will go. So much of it is what you say, what you're doing, and persisting. Often when we're talking about verbal de-escalation, everybody wants it to be like, okay, I just have to say this once and everybody will be calm. That is not how it works. You have to say it again and again, and you can't be condescending about it, right? So again, so much of this is just managing yourself. How do you repeatedly ask someone to do something if they're already amped up? How do you repeatedly tell yourself without getting annoyed with yourself, like, settle down? How do you can't control the way people feel, but you can influence the way they behave. And those are the goals that we're working towards.
That's really interesting that you bring that out. So you talk about managing yourself. This is like a pre, during, and post probably process of managing yourself. Like it's not just like, okay, somebody in front of me is agitated. All right, what did I learn about verbal de-escalation, right?
Yes.
So could you walk us through maybe like that whole process from like right now as you're learning to become a provider through your career, how can you continue to learn this topic?
Yeah. So just highlighting again what Jordan said. Whenever you're For me personally, whenever I interact with someone, whether I know them or not, always going in with the best of intentions and assuming that people are doing the best that they can. Now, you might be thinking, Maria, there are clearly people who are not doing the best that they can, and that's fine. You may know better than I do in a certain situation. However, going in with the idea that people are not doing the best that they can, that just sets everybody else up for a defensive stance. So you've all been in positions where you're hungry, you didn't sleep well, you're worried about something, and you're just trying to make it through the day. So every single opportunity that you have to assume the best of people, that just increases the likelihood that they're going to assume the best of you because they're going to see you trying. So I strongly encourage, like, even if you're having a bad day, that also means extending grace to yourself. So if you already know you're cranky, you got bad news, you got like tests coming up, you just had an interaction with a boss that didn't go very well, you know what? I'm feeling really cranky right now. So I'm going to make sure I eat a bite of something sweet before I go see this patient because I want to make sure I take care of myself so I don't take this out on the patient, right? So what can you do before an interaction with patient that will increase the likelihood that it goes well? And sometimes you can't do all the things, but you just do the best that you can. In the moment, taking the time, and this feels like it takes a lot of time. It actually doesn't. To be with the person in front of you, right? So if I'm going to have a appointment with Jordan and I walk into the appointment thinking like, Jordan's going to be really difficult and he's just going to demand things that I don't want to give to him and it's going to go really badly. I'm going to go in defensive. I might start tuning Jordan out because I already assume I know what it is that he wants. So taking the time to look at Jordan in the face, make eye contact, make sure that your body posture is as relaxed as it can be, and really listening to what Jordan has to say. Jordan might be like, hey, I want you to write me 50 prescriptions for X, Y, and Z. And that may not be reasonable. However, you can ask more instead of being like, no, I'm not writing those prescriptions for you. You're being so entitled. But instead, just like, well, tell me more about why you want 50 instead of 48, right? And I know this is a ridiculous example. And really being with the person in front of you will help them understand that you're trying to understand them. And then if you do have a terrible interaction with people, and it is going to happen, you can do everything perfectly to the T. You can be a model of de-escalation and it can still go badly, right? Because that's just how life works sometimes. So having a plan, it doesn't have to be a rigid plan. For me personally, if I'm encountering a client who like historically we've had difficult interactions, I'm worried we're going to have a difficult interaction, I make sure I have a snack ready afterwards. If it's that kind of interaction, I have a YouTube video of something that makes me laugh, like or a TikTok or something really short. Just I make sure I have a colleague that I can text and be like, hey, I just made it through this interaction, be HIPAA compliant, right? Like you can set up things afterwards to close a circle. And again, so much of it's just managing yourself, right? So you're going to have good days where everybody says, "Wow, you're so helpful," and "This was really great today," and that like it, you're going to have days like that, and you're going to have days where you do everything the best that you can, and it's not going to go well. And it doesn't necessarily mean you did something wrong or the rest of the world is hateful, but just having those things set up in place will increase the likelihood that it will go better than both parties think it will.
That's really interesting that you're bringing up those points because, like the verbal de-escalation, I'll be honest with you, I assumed going to this discussion we'd be like learning like techniques and different ways to talk to people, and I'm like, what I'm hearing you saying is it actually requires that you manage your own emotional state and mental state much more so than even the words that you say.
Yes, I think a lot of people have heard the pop psychology of, 70 to 80% of communication is nonverbals. There, I don't know how they exactly they get to 70 to 80%. However, the data that we do have supports the idea that so much of what communication isn't just the language that you're using. So, to use a very concrete example, think about clients that you work with, patients that you work with who speak different languages. Or they speak with an accent, you can still tell pretty quickly what their state of mind is, what their worries are, even if they're not using the words that you routinely would use, right? So, really paying attention. So again, managing yourself. This might mean practicing in front of a mirror. It might mean having somebody that you trust watch you talk to a person. Doesn't have to be a patient. You can ask your friends, your partners to watch you, to give you feedback. That might be really unnerving. You can record yourself because we all have tics. I know that's a technical term. We all have little behaviors that we do. Like right now, I'm not actually looking at the camera because it is hard for me to be doing this during this conversation. But if I'm doing this in real life and I'm not actually looking at the person in front of me, they might be like, "Oh, well, Dr. Yang's thinking about something else. Oh, Dr. Yang doesn't care about me." So if Jordan and I were in the same room, I would be making a point of looking at Jordan's eyes. But because I feel weird doing it on a screen, but I have to be aware that it's my issue. I feel weird. Jordan doesn't even know. So this is me, so I got to figure it out for myself.
That's really fascinating. I'm like I said, I kind of went into this conversation thinking one way, and what I'm hearing you saying is it's a lot of work on yourself have to do. So that's
Always.
great. Which some of the other topics that we are eventually going to delve into are like self-care for providers and all these other ways that you can learn to manage your own emotional state and just be ready to show up and do this work. So maybe to better understand why we're transitioning to this verbal de-escalation, or maybe like mental emotional preparation might be another way to think about it. Could you give us a little of the history of why healthcare providers have transitioned to this method of dealing with, like you said, patients, administrators, colleagues? Maybe just a little bit of the history and background there.
Sure. So, thankfully, we're in healthcare, we're moving forward in terms of thinking about things like power and how power can be misused or unfortunately sometimes abused. So, when people start behaving in ways that are not accepted in healthcare settings, the institution can end up using power in a way that causes a lot more harm. So again, let's use a very benign example. Someone who where English is not their primary language, they come into a hospital. All of you have spent time, at least rotations, in a hospital. It is a machine and things work a certain way. So this person starts trying to express what they need. Nobody understands them. They start getting louder. People think that they're being aggressive, right? So then people start shouting back. There's an assumption like you are behaving in a way that's not permitted in this setting, and things can ramp up really quickly, right? Whether it's a whole bunch of people showing up in a quote unquote show of force, if the hospital has security, a lot of security are running down the hallways. This, of course, any of you who've been in a position where you're surrounded by people that you don't know or you feel like you're threatened, that's just going to amp you up even more. So previously, there was some underlying assumption that patients don't know what they're talking about, are uninformed, we know better, we're always right. And again, thankfully, we're moving in a direction, we're still not quite there yet, but we're moving faster and closer in the direction of shared decision making, patient autonomy, doctors and nurses and all other healthcare providers, we can be wrong. So why can't we be more collaborative about this rather than this top down, we're right, you're wrong, shut up, you need to stop talking. So that sounds very dramatic, and things can go from 0 to 60 very quickly. And I think a lot of you have had clinical experiences already where you've seen that happen. So verbal de-escalation, again, it really is a moment for the professionals to pause, and that just creates an environment where patients are also more likely to pause, and then it just ends up being a better experience for everybody.
So then kind of related to that then, what makes verbal de-escalation challenging in a healthcare setting?
That's a great question. So I understand that students of all stripes feel unprepared. They're like, oh, but what if this goes badly? Or what if I screw up? Or what if this person's really mad at me? And that can lead to conflict. And for the most part, people are conflict avoidant. Um, so what makes verbal de-escalation challenging is time and also habit, right? So, any of you working, particularly in outpatient settings, you are on a time clock. You know, patients are waiting for you. There are phone messages. There are other things just pulling at you. And you might be thinking, I don't have time to do this. And I know I'm supposed to sound calm and I'm supposed to speak more slowly, but I don't have time. Like, I got stuff to do, right? So there's just the pressure of time. And sometimes that's just self-generated because often slowing down, speaking calmly, making sure that your body language is soft and open will make things end much more quickly than like, I gotta go, I gotta go. There's also, again, I think institutions and not just inpatient, but also outpatient, there's a sense of, well, we know more. This is a machine that's just moving forward. Um, so there will also be pressure, I'm sorry to say, sometimes from our professors, from students who are older than us, like, this is the way it's done. You got to do it this way. So those are very real pressures. And this is why, if you are interested in verbal de-escalation now, you can practice now. And the best time to practice is when you're not at work. So you practice on your friends, you practice on your parents, you practice on the grocery clerk, the one who like talks to you way too much when you're just trying to like check out your food. If you get your hair cut and your barber talks a lot, like what an opportunity to start practicing these skills. Because once you get those skills under your belt, it will come much more naturally when you need it while you're at work. So again, I really want to highlight verbal de-escalation. I know that sounds really dramatic, de-escalation. Right now in the world, people have opinions about what's happening in our country. What a prime opportunity to practice verbal de-escalation. So you can practice at any time and get feedback from people that you trust, because that is how you're going to become more comfortable when the time comes when somebody really is, like if you're working in an ED and someone is coming in really hot, it will come much more naturally to be like, hey, what's going on? Rather than like, oh my God, we got to do something.
So could maybe another way to reframe and think about verbal de-escalation is like healthy conflict skills, conflict resolution skills?
It's definitely part of it, yeah. And um, one thing that I want to highlight that could be a difference there, though, is conflict. So healthy conflict skills, absolutely, because there's going to be conflict in the world. There is some assumption in that the power differential is equal between the two parties. That again, I cannot emphasize enough. We have power in our roles as healthcare professionals, and if we are not aware of our own power or how other people perceive it, that is that's going to be a setup for conflict that can be avoided.
Yeah, and the other thing that was making me think when you were saying that is like conflict resolution already implies that there is already a conflict, and you're saying verbal de-escalation skills is even like we're gonna try to prevent conflict in the first place.
Correct.
Whoa. Okay, so it's like conflict resolution is a component of verbal de-escalation, but it's not the same thing as verbal de-escalation.
Thank you
Okay,
for such a succinct
yeah.
summary.
The more I'm thinking about this topic, I'm like, I understand like verbal de-escalation is the academic term that's been coined, but it kind of is, it doesn't, it kind of carries its own assumptions with that. And what you're saying is there's so much more behind that process, really.
Yes.
Yeah, this is cool. I'm really enjoying this conversation just for my own edification. Cool. Well, all right. Well, now that we've kind of, discussed about why it's important, maybe a good thing for people to get into the mindset of verbal de-escalation and the importance of it, are there any like practical guidelines that future providers can follow and take into their practice for verbal de-escalation skills?
Yes, there are some concrete things that are going to sound really obvious. And so the task here is for people to practice these things when the iron is cold, so that way when the iron is hot, it comes more naturally. So uh, we as healthcare professionals know that we are not trying to hurt people. However, our patients don't always know that, and certain demographic groups have been harmed intentionally by the healthcare system. We think about the Tuskegee syphilis experiment. We think about a lot of women of Native and Latino cultures who've had hysterectomies done without them
Mhm.
knowing about it, right? So
Right.
we may think like, well, I'm trying to help this person, but the people in front of us don't actually know that. So the first thing is just physical stuff, right? So uh, you may be like, I'm going to get close to this person because I'm just trying to be a comforting presence. And that person might be like, you have a needle behind your back and you're going to stab me, right? Like, and you may be like, nobody actually thinks that, or like, there's something wrong with them that they think that. People have had other experiences with other people where they're coming in pretty guarded. So it is so important to respect people's personal space, particularly if they're already coming in, even like a little, you get the sense like they're a little defensive, they're having a bad day, they're a little cranky. So, people have talked about 6 feet or like 2 arms length distance away. You want to make sure you're not communicating to the person, I can reach out and touch you. Again, you're not just trying to protect yourself. There is that element too, but people need to know that you can't just reach out and like bop them on the head, right?
Mhm.
So respecting personal space, and it feels weird to say this when you're practicing, but in the moment, it can be very effective. You can ask people, do you feel comfortable if I get closer? Right. But starting off at a distance so people know, like, okay, you're not going to strike me. And then you also know, like, well, then you're not going to strike me either because we're a certain distance away. So the first thing is really respecting personal space. And that, I mean, applies to everything. And unfortunately, because of the pandemic, we all have a good sense of what 6 feet is. So that's like a fine barometer to start with. The second thing, which, again, going back to this idea of body language. So practicing with other people in front of a mirror, recording yourself, what you're doing with your body when you're interacting with other people. Uh, so I think some guidelines they talk about not being provocative. The issue is you may be doing things that are actually provocative. And you don't realize it. So the example I typically use is if we draw a stick figure that's throwing a ball, when you see it, you're like, oh, that's a human figure throwing a ball. And the act of throwing a ball is quite provocative. This person is typically running, they have their arm back, and they're about to chuck something. That is threatening, right? Like if someone's throwing a thing at you, for any of you who play baseball or have watched baseball or basketball, and there's a ball coming at you, and these are professional people, and the ball got hit foul, like there's a ball coming at you, that is pretty scary. And if you saw a baseball player chucking a ball at you, you'd be like, oh, maybe we're playing catch, or maybe they're trying to hit me with the ball. So, really knowing what your body language is doing. So, this means, so practical ways to do this. Record yourself having a conversation with a person. If you want to do it with a patient encounter, ask them first. If you want to record a conversation with your supervisor, listening to your tone of voice. I'm from California. I talk like I'm from California. This has been very helpful to me because I naturally sound informal. And this also means when I'm presenting in front of fancy pants people, I'm going to dial down the musicality of my voice. I'm going to say like less. I'm going to quiet down a little bit like I am right now. But that's because I know at baseline, I kind of talk like I'm from California because I am from California, right? This also means watching your face, right? So this whole idea of, I don't want to use profanity here, but like the resting bee face. Some people, that's what their face looks like at rest. They're not angry, they're not cantankerous. That's just what their face looks like. And to be aware of that. So getting feedback, and I'm not saying like don't be yourself. Like we're not trying to be emojis and like we're just gonna serve whatever you want me to look like. But if you know, like, okay, when I'm tired, this is what my face looks like, then you can do different things so you are more aware of how you're presenting to other people. Um, this also means watching your body language. So we often talk about open and closed body language, right? So closed body language, your arms are crossed, your legs are crossed. You might be just like kind of curled up a little bit. Some people interpret that as defensiveness that you don't care about what they're talking about. Open body language, right? So relaxed, maybe turn your body at a certain 45-degree angle so you're not facing the person straight on. How close is your chair to the other person? And I know this sounds super shrinky. I know. And that stuff actually matters, right? So the next time if you are seeing a therapist or you're seeing a healthcare provider and they pull up their chair so their knees are almost touching yours, you're going to be like, that is super weird because like nobody does that. But if you are naturally doing things that you're not even aware is super weird or other people might perceive as super weird, that's just something to attend to. So once you know what your body language looks like, what your voice sounds like, how your face moves in interactions, then you can start tailoring those skills with people who are not doing really well. And again, I want to be really clear. We're not talking about psych patients. Does it apply to people who are having psychiatric symptoms? Absolutely. But this applies to anybody. You are about to give bad news to somebody. You just gave bad news to somebody. They are crying, they are upset. Um, Right now, I'm talking a lot. I actually usually don't talk this much. Part of the reason why I try not to talk this much is because people can't hold it, right? So if someone's upset, you don't want to be like, so I understand that you're feeling very upset right now. It is natural to be feeling overwhelmed.
Yeah.
You understand that there are things that you can do right now to make yourself feel better. Like they're not going to hear any of that, right? So once you understand this is what my body language looks like, this is what I sound like, then you can just cut down the number of words. Hey, sit down with me. Tell me what's going through your mind. What's changing right now? Like those are things that people can grab onto. They don't have to answer you, but you being calm and speaking very short and very concise is going to help people not feel overwhelmed. I don't know how many of you have ever had three or two or more people talking at you at the same time. Like if someone's worried about you, like, hey, are you okay? And they're like all saying things, long sentences. You can't understand what they're saying, right? So respect personal space. Be sure you know what your body's doing at least most of the time. And then when you do start speaking, speak in short sentences because people, when they're upset for legitimate reasons, they can't hear more. So I think those are like the top three things under the umbrella of you have to manage yourself. Because again, you know how sometimes when people get anxious, they start like bopping their knee or they start like doing things with their head, they start tilting. Like if you don't know that's what you're doing, and people might get agitated because they see you bopping your leg up and down, like, oh, this person's about to like get up and run out of the room, or like they're going to do something to me. You have to be aware of yourself.
Yeah, really good. The last point that I wanted to bring out is the article that you shared talks about the difference between agitation and aggression. And we've been talking a lot about this topic in terms of like a strengths-based approach, and it matters how you approach interacting with people. But can you just briefly speak on the difference between agitation and aggression?
So, so many of us enter healthcare because we want to help people, and most people who come to get services want to be helped. It's really hard to ask people for help, particularly in our culture. So often when people come to us, they want help. I want to be really clear. What I'm about to say only applies to a very, very small minority of people. So please, I don't want people saying, Dr. Yang thinks everybody's trying to screw everybody else. That is not what I'm saying. There's a very small proportion of people who they will try to get their needs met through health appointments, and that is not the way to do it. And so examples that come to mind. So some people, if you are female and you work in healthcare professions, there are, I'm sorry to say, a very, very small minority of males who will come in and they will say things to you, try to touch you in weird places. And that is not your job, right? Or if you are in a position where you can prescribe things, some people are going to come into the office and they are going to say things to you to try to get you to write a lot of prescriptions for things that are totally not indicated. And they might say some things to uh, and from their point of view, persuade, but you might experience as coercion, right? Like it would be really bad if I sent a letter to the state medical board because you're not being a good doctor right now and not writing this prescription for me, right? So again, this is highly uncommon. I don't want people thinking that this is the vast majority of people because it's not. So there are different kinds of instances where people may look agitated. And when we talk about agitation, let me be clear, agitation is often like repetitive, non-purposeful movement. So this is people tapping their foot, pacing, maybe they're rubbing their head. They might just be mad. They're not even mad at you. They're just like they're agitated because of whatever they're going through. So that is distinct from aggression. Agitation and aggression exist on a continuum. Aggression is harmful things, people throwing things, people saying threatening things, people hurting other people. There will be an instance, I'm sorry to say, where you may hear about or you yourself may experience someone being aggressive, not necessarily because they're mad, but because they're trying to get their needs met. And I'm purposely saying trying to get their needs met because if we start attributing, like, well, this person's just a jerk, they might be, but you're not God. You don't know. So they're trying to get their needs met. Like, I'm going to yell at Dr. Yang and threaten to hurt her family so I can get this prescription because I feel like I need this medication to function in a day-to-day way. My point of view is going to be like, oh my God, you're threatening me and this is not cool. And just because people threaten you doesn't mean that that's okay. That is not your job. So, we all hear about in the course of healthcare training, do no harm. And that is a clinical ethic that we must adhere to. There is, however, this other side where you don't have to take crap, right? So if someone is threatening you, trying to hurt you, and you have evidence over time, or maybe over the course of the interaction, that they're calm, they're actually not agitated, they are just trying to get their needs met in a very unskillful way. This is when you talk to your supervisor, you say, excuse me, I need to go talk to my supervisor. You leave the room and you say, like, this thing is happening. Can somebody else come in? Or like, what should we do? Because you do not have to take crap. Now, again, I'm not saying like the moment someone fumbles that you leave the room, like somebody uses the wrong pronoun or somebody their English is not their first language and maybe they say something that's not entirely appropriate. Like, we want to give people the benefit of the doubt. However, your safety matters. And if you're not feeling safe, the other person's not going to feel safe. So do no harm, but also take no crap. And if someone's being aggressive, your safety matters. Do what you need to do to take care of yourself. If it was aggression because they were really upset and overwhelmed, there are opportunities later to quote unquote repair, have a conversation like, hey, this thing happened. What can we do in the future together so that this doesn't happen again? Again, this is very uncommon. It does happen. I don't want to be naive about it either. It does happen, but it's not that common.
Well, so that's good to know. So what I'm hearing you're saying is basically verbal de-escalation is this mindset where you approach every interaction with your patients, with your colleagues to trying to have a positive resolution. Maybe a person does get slightly agitated. You could still use those principles to make sure you have a positive uh, interaction in the end. But if it does get to the point where a patient or a colleague or whomever is overtly aggressive, then at that point it's time to kind of take a step back and maybe get some other people involved too de-escalate that situation.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Yeah, well, that's good to know. I guess everything has its limits then, apparently.
Yes.
If people are literally swinging at you, you don't have to stand there and say, well, now see if we can talk it through. So,
Run with
um,
pride. Run with your head
yeah.
held high.
Well, this is a fascinating discussion. It actually went in a different direction than I thought it was going to. So, just kind of maybe like a wrap up. So you have quite a bit of experience working as a psychiatrist, working with public health setting. What do you think, like if you had one thing you wanted somebody to take away from this conversation today, what would be that one thing?
We are so lucky to be doing this work. I know sometimes it doesn't feel like we're very lucky. The person in front of you is a person. We are we are living in very interesting times. We've heard this so many times. It's unprecedented times, so unprecedented. Regardless of what your opinion is about the current state of politics in the US, like honestly, regardless of your opinion, we're seeing a lot of examples of people not treating people like people, right? So this person in front of you has dignity. They have their own life experiences. They've gone through things that you have no idea, just like you've gone through things that very few people, if anybody else, knows that you've been through. So one of the ways that we can help people heal, right? So I'm not necessarily talking about cure, I'm talking about heal, is to treat people like people. So that means looking them in the eye, treating them with respect, um, doing the best that you can to remember that, yes, you might be having a bad day. This person might also be having a bad day. Having that sort of, and I know this sounds really fluffy and again, shrinky. And so much of how we comport ourselves affects how the person experiences healthcare. So the population I have typically worked with, they generally hate the healthcare system. They go into EDs, they get yelled at, they get booted out, sometimes for valid reasons, sometimes not, right? It's maybe because they haven't been able to take a shower in a month because there's no restroom available and people don't treat them well because they do not smell good. They are otherwise like actually pretty polite, courteous people. They just do not smell good, right? So then they feel shamed. They never want to talk to anybody ever again. They develop a health condition. It gets really, really bad, and then we have to use emergency services. People don't want to talk to me because they're like, "You're a psychiatrist. You can take away people's rights." I'm worried that if I even talk to you, that you're going to ship me off to a hospital. So you guys, all of you in training right now, if you're working in formal institutions, you are helping. I mean, this is going to sound selfish. That's not actually the point. If you have good interactions or useful interactions with clients and they're more likely to see you, that makes my job easier because if I ever encounter them, they won't be like, oh, you're like all those other people who's going to treat me poorly. They're going to be like, oh, you're like this student doctor or student nurse I met in Wenatchee, and they were really nice to me. So thanks for that, right? So we end up getting lumped into a big umbrella of healthcare providers, and people have opinions. So you treating a person like a person is going to increase the likelihood that they're going to come back to get health care, that they're willing to talk to other colleagues, that they're willing to be invested in themselves and have more self-esteem, like, oh, my health matters. It's actually worth it for me to take better care of myself because somebody else thinks it's good for me to take care of myself. And that stuff really matters. And for those of you who may not have like a whole bunch of letters after your name, you might be like, oh, it doesn't matter. I can't tell you the number of techs who have amazing interactions with clients, and they're the reasons why people come back for follow-up studies or whatever the case may be. So if you treat a person like a person, you can really help with healing.
Really love that that's the direction you went in for your closing comments because one of the things we talk about a lot with AHEC and with our scholars is like you are going to be the future healthcare leaders in America. Like that's the idea, that's the plan. You're going to go off and do great things, and the little bit of extra help that we can provide from the AHEC perspective, it's this downstream effect of like maybe they have had these horrible interactions their entire life in healthcare, but you're finally the first patient that they have a positive interaction with, and that could be the springboard onto, and then maybe the next person they also have a really good interaction, and suddenly it's like they went from being I hate having to work with healthcare to oh it's maybe I've just had some bad experiences. It's kind of funny that you said that because I was working with a friend of mine who's doing their research recently, and she's like trying to what are your perspective on some issues in healthcare, and she was kind of getting to that point about like negative interactions, and I'm like, I don't think I've ever actually had a negative interaction in a healthcare setting. And like I haven't gone to the doctor very often, but when I have, it's been pretty positive. So for me to kind of approach this topic of like verbal de-escalation is like, well, what do you mean? I always have good positive interactions with my doctors. But maybe there's a good chunk of people who have not had that experience. And for our scholars, if you can learn these skills of verbal de-escalation, of positive conflict resolution, approaching every person, every patient as a human being, as a person, you are going to be that springboard for somebody to have a much better experience in the healthcare system.
Yes.
Very good. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Yang. Did you have any last comments to make? I know I asked you for your one big takeaway, but any other thing you thought of that you want to for sure mention to our students, to our
Thanks so
listeners?
much to the students for being interested in doing this pathway. There's so many other things that are pulling at your time, and your interest in serving underserved and rural populations really matters, right? So people, regardless of their station or location in life, they deserve high quality health care, and you all are taking active steps to make that happen. So thanks.
Awesome. Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Yang. We love having you come guest speak for us. I think this is the third or fourth time I've gotten to work with you now. And then Leonora, of course, she has nothing but positive things to say about you. You've done great work with us in AHEC and hope to continue that relationship moving forward. In fact, I think we even have you currently scheduled for another follow-up episode. So be on the lookout for a part 2 with Dr. Yang. So thanks everybody for listening and have a good rest of your day.